Hey everybody, Jake here. Thanks for tuning in to the channel, and today we're going to be talking about dual battery systems. So welcome everybody. I know I've been talking about doing a dual battery system video for a while because a lot of people have been asking about it. So here it is. I can't wait to talk to you guys about all these great products and stuff I've been using. Instead of doing your typical how-to video where I put it together and show me putting it together and installing it and everything like that, I went through. I already installed it. I've had it in the truck for about a year, and that's kind of the reason why I want to do a video now as opposed to when I first installed it, because with a system like this you're probably going to have some things that you're going to change and that you're going to figure out what works, what doesn't work, and everything like that. And I knew I was going to have that coming along with this project. So I wanted to make sure after a year I kind of just fine-tuned everything. I wanted to make sure the system worked for you guys because I didn't want to give you any information that might be misleading or anything like that. So I really wanted to go through and make sure the system works. And after a year I could tell you it's been working really great. I've learned a lot of great things from a lot of great people. And my one goal is to share that knowledge with all of you. Now, so before we get into anything, start talking about products or tools and stuff to use, I personally would recommend, if you're thinking about doing a system like this, look at my video, look at the products I used, look at a couple other videos, kind of get an idea of what you're getting yourself into. Look at a few videos and kind of really think about like how different systems are going to be able to really apply to your specific need, right? The next thing I would recommend, go and talk to somebody that does this for a living. Those are going to be the guys that know the best and most important information about installing a system like this, and they'll have different recommendations based on what you tell them and what your applications are going to be. People that do dual battery systems a lot, people that are at off-road shops, typically they'll do a lot of dual battery systems. People that do sound systems, typically they have dual battery systems, and because they need a secondary dual battery for running all the amps and all that stuff that goes in the back of your vehicles for making your sound and everything like that. Those are some other guys that have some really great information on how to put together one of these systems and products and stuff that they use. If you're looking at this channel, I'm guessing it's because you want to install your own system. Installing your own system is great. I think it's amazing. I personally would rather install my own system carefully, and as opposed to having somebody else do it, because that way I know where all the wiring is going. I know where each individual connection is, and the most important thing for our application, especially if you're in the off-road world, is if something's going wrong with it, you can diagnose it yourself, figure out what the problem is, and in most cases, as long as you have the right equipment and tools that you probably will carry after, I'm assuming after this video, you'll be able to fix it. And those are really important things to be able to, I believe, have, is being able to work on your own vehicle, especially in the off-road setting, because you may be out in the middle of nowhere and you need you know, this stuff to work perfectly fine. So with that being said, let's go ahead and let's dive into it. So like anything else with doing any system is you start off with the basics. Me personally, I like to draw everything out, right? So I really need to figure out how much power was going to be going from my alternator to my auxiliary battery, right? So I figured, all right, looked up my alternator. Its output is 130 amps, right? All right, no problem at all. I then figured out that my length from my starter battery to my isolator and then to my auxiliary battery was 19 feet. So what I went and did is I looked up a wire gauge reference guide. This was the one I found. It's Overland equipped. I'll put a link up there. So I looked it up and looks like I need to use 1/0 gauge wiring for 19 feet. Alright, so now I know my wiring size that I need to run from my starter battery to my auxiliary battery. And the biggest thing that I wanted to make sure too was I didn't have any loss in power. You know, I wanted minimal amperage loss as much as I possibly could between the alternator charging the auxiliary battery. So I really wanted to make sure that I was able to charge up my auxiliary battery as best as I can. So I went down to the local electrical, not the local electrical store. I went to a electrical store that all they carry is large diameter wiring, just like this. And I ended up getting, I always wanted to always get more than you have to, so I thought I needed 19 feet, excuse me. I got 22 feet because the last thing that you want to do is run a line or run wire from here to here and then you're short and then you have to crimp and stuff like that, because once you start getting to this large diameter wiring, and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about here in a bit, it's a lot harder to crimp and it's a lot harder to work with in some cases. So I went out and got 22 feet for my positive wiring and my negative wiring. Okay, so like I was stating previously, when you start getting into your larger diameter wiring, you end up having to use larger everything, right? So this right here is a 2/0 gauge wire that I had lying around. I used this for another project, but you can just see in correlation how much larger this wiring is. I mean, look at my finger compared to this wiring, right? It's huge. So if you're having to make connections, you end up having to use large connectors, right? I mean, look at the size of these things, right? So ideally what you'd have to do is, these are basically just large butt connectors, and then you'd have to cut your sleeve, slide this over, and then get a really large crimper like this one. These are not cheap either. I think this was like $130 or something like that. And then have to crimp your wire. So save yourself some time if you can. Don't use any large butt connectors or anything like that. Try and just run a solid battery from eyelet to eyelet, from your starting battery straight to your auxiliary battery without having to do any connections. Or I'm sorry, from your starting battery straight to your isolator, your battery isolator, which we're going to go over, without using any connections at all. Alright? And then once eventually you're going to have to put eyelets on this diameter wire. So what you can do, and I didn't know about these type of connections until recently, is you can use soldering pellets. That's these guys right here. The way these work is you have your eyelet, right? And then you put your solder pellet into the eyelet, grab some vice grips or something like that to hold your eyelet, drop the solder pellet in there, heat up your eyelet with a torch or something like that. Eventually all this solder will melt in the inside, and then you take your larger diameter wire with it already cut back, and then you basically just slide it into the eyelet with the solder still hot. Now, the one thing that is dangerous about this stuff is the solder is obviously going to be very hot, so you have to be careful about not splashing on yourself and not splashing it in your vehicle either. But solder, after talking to a lot of guys that do a lot of electrical work like this, is a much far better way to go as opposed to using a crimper. Now, if you absolutely had to use a butt connector for larger diameter wire, what those guys were recommending to do is same thing, cut back your sleeve, slide on your butt connector, and then you can take one of these solder pellets, put it in there, and then take obviously your other end, put it in there as well, and then you heat it up and then melt the solder, and then that'll help to fuse your wires together. But again, personally, I would recommend, if you can, try not to use any butt connectors, because eventually I've learned that butt connectors, it doesn't seem to matter what size you use, they're just not really a good contact point. If you can, just run straight line straight to whatever you're going to without using any butt connectors. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and I'm going to show you how I did it on the Ford, and then we're going to go right from there. Alright, so we're going to start here at the front and then work our way to the back where all the other electronics and everything else is going on. So I had to change, with this system, my my eyelets for my starter battery, because with the ones that came with the truck, I wasn't able to run these extra features off of it. I pretty much would have to be running everything off of the nut right here, and I didn't really like it. It looked tacky, and then not to mention it wasn't really working out very well. So I changed to these different battery connectors, and then basically just resoldered all of my wires and everything like that. And then I was able to go over to or ordered online some of these bus fuses from Amazon, and then now I use those, and they're basically a large amperage fuse block, or they call them bus blocks, I believe, on Amazon. These are, I think, were about $20. They're $20 a piece, so they're not cheap, but I really wanted to make sure that I protected my starter battery, so doing fuses was absolutely a must to make sure that I didn't want to damage my starter battery at all whatsoever. So for the winch, I ran 150 amp fuse, and then currently for my dual battery system, my auxiliary battery, I'm running a 100 amp fuse. Because the other thing I wanted to do too was I wanted to make sure that the current going through that, if any, I wanted the fuse to pop before the wire starts melting. So that's why I'm running a 100 amp fuse as opposed to a larger 150 amp fuse and having to worry about my wiring melting, because you want your fuse to pop before your wiring does. So I did that, and then for the negative, I ran originally when I had my negative going from my auxiliary battery back and just grounding to the frame of the truck. But I later found out for doing dual battery systems, if you want to create a better circuit for charging your auxiliary battery, you need to run the negative battery terminal of your auxiliary battery to the negative battery terminal of your starting battery. And then again, this was all 1/0 gauge wire. I really wanted to further make sure I protected it, so I used wire loom everywhere and to make sure that none of this wiring was going to get exposed to any exhaust or anything like that, just as an extra way to make sure to protect it. So that's if you use large diameter wiring, it's expensive stuff. So the last thing you want to do is especially end up having to replace it. And furthermore, you want to make sure that you protect it, because there's a lot of current obviously going through that auxiliary battery wiring when it's engaged. So this is where I ended up running the wiring into the cab of the truck. There's a, if you can see it right here, there's a vent on the back side of your cab in between the truck bed and the cab that I ran all the wiring through. And then of course wrapped it in wire loom. I double wrapped it right here just to make sure it wasn't going to get cut on any of the edges or anything like that. And then from there, ran it into what is now my battery compartment. So right here, that wiring comes down this way and then comes across and then comes to this Blue Sea isolator that I got right here. I'll put up a price tag of how much this thing was. Blue Sea, from what I've understand, makes probably some of the best products for electrical systems. Everything is marine grade. Everything's meant for like boats and stuff like that. It's meant to get wet. Like, I could actually theoretically put this on the outside of the truck, I believe, and it'd be perfectly fine. So from there, I ran the other wiring from here all the way up to another fuse. This fuse is the same thing, 100 amp fuse, and then straight to my auxiliary battery right here. So, auxiliary battery that I'm running, this is a XP12 400 FR. You guys can kind of see that. There's a lot of stuff going on here. So this right here is a 100 amp hour battery. So I ended up going with a AGM battery because obviously this battery is in the cab of the truck right now. So I didn't want to use lead acid, lithium, anything like that. I wanted a completely sealed battery. As far as I'm concerned, I feel like it's a far better place to have. There really wasn't any in this vehicle, the 2001 F-150, there really wasn't any other place to put it. The engine compartment, like you saw, already has a lot of stuff going on. So I really wasn't too concerned about putting it in here, just because I knew that I was going to make sure that I was going to keep it in a grid location, because fortunately location is everything, and that way all the wiring in here as well is all nice and protected from the elements. I don't have to worry about, you know, it being anywhere else in the truck and having to worry about it getting weathered or anything like that. So I know it's going to last a long time being in here protected from the elements. So now we're going to get into the other electronic side. So right here, coming off of my battery, I have a this is 6-gauge wire, and then I have a switch right here. And then from there goes across and then goes to this right here. This is a low voltage disconnect. So what's nice about having one of these guys is you don't have to worry about your auxiliary battery draining to a level that could potentially damage it. This will automatically kill your low all the electronics. The way I have it wired, it will automatically shut off and shut off all the electronics before it starts damaging your battery. Which is something that I really wanted, because I didn't want to be damaging my battery. I'd rather have, you know, all the systems shut off. because the way I wired it was essentially it comes down to right here to the fuse blocks. Now this fuse block right here is from the online LED store. You know, personally, this fuse block is cool. Like if one of the fuses breaks or pops, a light will come on and then they'll let me know, hey, this fuse needs to get changed out, or etc. But if I could do it again, I would probably go get actually a Blue Sea fuse block, just because I like the way Blue Sea's fuse blocks, they come with the labels and everything. That way you don't have to write everything in, and then you just basically stick the labels on, and it makes it look a ton cleaner. And on top of that, it still has the LED lights that indicate which fuse has blown, so it still has all the same basic functions. And then from there we have all of our other stuff we have going on. The other major thing I wanted to do was I ran a circuit for my Dometic fridge right here that comes down and runs off of DC. And then the other thing I added in too was right here we have ourselves a 500 watt power inverter. You know, that was a great addition because I didn't really think about it, but I actually needed AC power, and in a bit I'll kind of show you why. Alright, so now we're going to come up forward, and this is that custom center console that I was telling you guys about. You guys follow me on Instagram, you've seen this thing. I just finished it probably about a week ago, and so far it's been coming along really nicely. So up here is a little experimental thing I'm working on. These are some camera holders. I'm still working on the designing of those. There's all storage on the inside of this thing too. Cup holders, AC power, which I'll explain why we need that up front in a little bit. And then here we have our two charging ports. These are phone holder cubbies right here, so essentially you can just take your phone and then it just kind of drops right in right there to hold your phone. And then up here we have 8 switches all the way across. Right here is our that Blue Sea manual switch right here that I've been telling you guys about. And then here we have our starter battery voltage, our auxiliary battery voltage, and then all of our lights control and everything like that. And then here, I've been running this for about 2-3 years now, is a tire pressure monitoring system, which is really nice if your vehicle doesn't come with tire pressure monitoring. So yeah, we're going to talk about these systems in just a bit here, and I'll show you kind of why I ran it this way. Okay, so if you guys all know me, I'm definitely a big function person. So the reason why we had to run the AC power, right? So I run an iPad for navigation, right? Usually the co-pilot or whoever's going with me will run navigation, or I can run it myself. But the one thing with iPads is they take a lot of power, especially if you're using apps. So in order to charge them and be able to maintain that power while you're using apps, you have to run AC power. You can't. I've tried charging the iPads off the iPad off DC, and it just does not work. So what I did was I ran this port in right here, and then basically what I'll do is I'll take the factory charger that comes with the iPad and then run it from here and then straight up to the iPad. And that way I can charge it and use it at the same time. And I could actually leave it on and it still will charge. Back to function. You'll notice I don't have the typical bench seat in here anymore. I took out the bench seat and then put in 2 bucket seats. That way I can run the center console all the way through the vehicle, right? It's definitely, I really enjoy having the center console. I custom made this specifically for the truck. I'm getting better at woodworking, and so far it's been incredible to have. Having cup holders, I have more cup holders in the back because sometimes you'll want to drink water and then something else. But then having all the switches and having everything cleaned up like that. That metal, I'm sure if you've seen any of my videos, you've seen the metal center console I had up here before. It worked good, but at the same time, it was kind of just one of those, I kind of wanted to clean it up and make the truck look a little bit better. So I went and finally took some time and I just made this custom center console, and I think it really turned out really just truly amazing. I'm really happy with the way it came out. A lot of people are wondering, why do you go with wood? Or why did you go with wood? Well, one thing I figured out with building stuff is I like to change stuff a lot. And I like to change gauges and where the switches are to make everything more convenient and more easy to use. Like, I probably designed this thing for probably about a month before I finally figured out how I officially wanted to do it. I lowered down the center console, making sure that it was going to clear the this piece right here, because this is how you get into all the other wiring in the truck. I wanted to make sure it was still easy to work at, still easy to use the switches and everything else like that. So it's definitely been a great little addition. Having extra storage, especially like before the center console that was in here originally, you had the flip up that was right here. Now I have storage in here and in here. So it really does come a long way, just sometimes building your own stuff. Coming back to the other stuff on the center console, this right here is the, like I said, the manual switch for the auxiliary battery system. We'll see if you guys can hear this. So, definitely a very noticeable click, right? The other reason why I wanted to run a dual battery system is, like, let's say the starter battery is low and my auxiliary battery is high, right? So let's go ahead and turn everything on here. So let's say, this is my starter battery. My starting battery right now is at 12.7 volts. My auxiliary battery, currently, let's say it's at, we'll say it's at 13.6, and let's say my auxiliary battery is just no good. I can connect the two batteries together, and I can start my truck off of my auxiliary battery. Now, I have not run across that situation yet where I've had to do that, because I do a pretty good job of maintaining my batteries, but at the same time, it's still a possible feature that you can use. Okay, so that's pretty much everything for the inside of the vehicle. Now, when I discuss with you guys some other stuff, once you start doing some basic electronics, a little kit that you should carry. So I started building this. Every time that I bought fuses for the truck or needed to use fuses in the fuse block or anything like that, I started adding to this. So in here, and I recommend keeping this in your vehicle in case you have any problems with any of your electronics. You have essentially everything. You have some different wire butt connectors, you have electrical tape, various types of your connectors for connecting to your switches and everything like that. But probably some of the most important things that you can carry are spare fuses. Especially like these ones right here, the ones I was telling you before. These bus fuses, these are kind of hard to come by, especially if you start getting up into the 150, 100 amp range. You can't typically find those at any of your local automotive stores. So anything that's special like that you can't find anywhere else, I would personally recommend getting. Any of your blade fuses that you may not have, ranging in different sizes. I also carry some spare relays. I have a couple 40 amp relays that I carry just in case, because if your relays go out, then maybe your lights aren't going to work or whatever you have else connected to them. For at home and stuff like that. The other thing I just learned about too is these new connectors. I'm still experimenting with these, but so far they are truly amazing. These you can also get on Amazon. Not sure if you guys can see those. I'll post up a picture of it, that way you guys can kind of see what these are. They're built with solder already put into them, and they also seal on by themselves as well. So basically you stick a wire in here, stick a wire in this end, then you take a heat gun, and then the heat gun will melt the solder that's already in here, and then you can basically create a much better, stronger connection. Like I was stating previously, when you're trying to run connections and stuff like that, using solder is a far better way to go than using your typical butt connectors like these guys, where basically you just stick a wire in, crimp it, and then you're good to go. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, Jake, if these are better, why don't you have these in your kit instead of these? Well, as much better as the other ones already use, the solder connectors, one, you need to use a heat gun. Personally, you can use either a heat gun or a lighter. I personally would not use I don't like using lighters in my truck because of all the carpet and everything else that's going on in there, because the last thing I want to do is start a fire in my truck. I doubt I would ever do that, but it's a lot safer to use a heat gun with these than it is a lighter. That's why I carry these butt connectors, and then I'll carry a crimper as well. But if I'm at home, I'll use these all day because these are going to make a much stronger connection. Like, I just found out about these probably about a week ago, and I'm probably going to replace every single butt connector I have in the truck with one of these guys because they are self-sealing. Oh, and the other thing is too, is they're clear. They're see-through. So that way you can actually see into your wires and see if your solder and your wire connections are still there and are still strong. The problem with these guys, you can't see through them. You can't see your connections. You don't know if your connections are still good. The only way that you're going to know is if you start doing little pull tests on every single one of your butt connections, which I know what you're saying. Technically, or what you're thinking, technically you should do a pull test before or right after you apply a butt connector. But here's the thing, we're off-roading. Stuff moves around, stuff gets yanked on, you know. Especially if you're transitioning your vehicle and everything like that, wires are going to start pulling at each other. So you're going to have wires that are going to get, you know, and the other thing is too, is stuff is vibrating as well. You're going to have connections start breaking apart. So instead of having to go through and doing pull tests on every single one of them, you can just pick up one of these guys, look through it and see, oh, all right, well, there's my bad connection right there. All right, I just got to cut that. Hopefully you left yourself a little bit of extra wiring. That's another thing I recommend too, is if when you guys are doing wiring, leave yourself a little bit of excess just in case you need to throw in another connector or anything like that. The other problem with those running these connectors as well is I could keep a heat gun in my truck, but then I have to worry about it breaking. And then on top of that, I also have to worry about the amount of amperage draw with a heat gun. You wouldn't believe it, but this heat gun right here draws 1500 watts. So that's not really something that you can really carry in your vehicle without having a 1500 watt inverter, which 1500 watt inverters are ginormous. So when it comes to keeping connectors in my personal vehicle, I'll stick with the old school ones, but when it comes to working on stuff here at home, I'll use the newer ones that I like. Which comes back to my next point. So remember I told you, I gave you the little hint of why do you think I wasn't getting the voltage I needed initially from the alternator to the auxiliary battery. And drum roll, it was the winch. That's right, people. I had my winch. I didn't think about it at the time because, you know, this is just wiring. You learn stuff. I had my winch directly connected to my starter battery, which at the time made a lot of sense because I figured, okay, the only time I'm going to be using, there wasn't any point in me running my winch off of my auxiliary battery because I knew that I wasn't going to be, my winch draws so much power, there's no point in me running it off the auxiliary battery. I'm going to just drain my auxiliary battery, and chances are if I'm using my winch, my truck is going to be running. So the problem that I had was I had it directly wired to my starter battery with no, I had fuses on there, but what I didn't account for was the fact that winches, even though you're not using them, they still draw a ton of power. I figured out my winch, when it's not setting there, not using it at all, it draws 70 amps. So as soon as my neighbor, he's another guy who's very good at electronics, talked to me about it. He's like, you shouldn't be having that much amperage draw between your starter battery and your auxiliary battery, because that was what was happening is my starter battery would be at like 13.6 volts, and then when I engaged my my isolator to start charging my auxiliary battery would only go up to like 12.8 or maybe 13 volts. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Why is it that my starter battery is being charged by my alternator and it's at like 13.6 volts, but my auxiliary battery is at the most I can get out of it is it gets up to 13 volts. Well, then he figured out, he's like, is your starter battery wired direct, or your winch wired directly to your starter battery? And I was like, yes. And he's all like, that's why right there, disconnect it. Sure enough, he was right. I disconnected it, and I have now, I want to say 0.1 amps of difference between my starting battery and then my auxiliary battery. Once my isolator engages and my starter battery is at 13.6 volts, my auxiliary battery will be at like 13.5, 13.4 volts, and that's on the low side. With these, the other thing I figured out too, alternators. I want to say it was right around 2006 to 2007, the alternators changed dramatically. Apparently newer vehicles, the alternators do not have the amount of output power that alternators had previously for older vehicles. So the other thing that you have to look into is the output of your alternator and what it's going to be. Another site I went on to was, I believe it was Genesis Off-Road or something like that. I'll put a link up, but they're talking about how you might potentially have to run a I believe it was a DC to DC charger or something along the lines of that, because the output of your newer alternators are not going to be as much as your older vehicle alternator. So that's another thing to consider as well. If you're trying to run a dual battery system with a newer vehicle, you might run into some of the things like that. As far as other electrical components and everything like that, another thing that you can do, like you saw in the truck, how I had some of the wiring in the back was connected. If I know it's wiring that I may potentially get into again, I'll use these little Velcro straps. That way it's not zip ties and I have to cut them every single time to go through my wiring and stuff like that. Some guys, they go extent as to far as they'll bring like a full, for their lights, they'll bring a full wiring harness for their lights just in case their lights die. I'll carry maybe a few extra feet of wire, but besides that, my wiring has been pretty good so far. I haven't really had too many problems with it. The only problems that I have had is occasionally my relays will fail, but that's no problem at all. You basically just swap out the relays. The biggest question I know I always get is how much time did it take? What was the cost? And then what else? What kind of, how long can I run the dual battery system for? So, time, I think with everything together in my dual battery system, all the electronics I had to add and take away, I would probably estimate I've probably done about close to 10 to 12 hours of wiring, but that's with everything added together. I've taken stuff out, I've added stuff in, I've changed a couple of things. That's including the center console and building that. So it's one of those things where once you start getting into it, you'll probably end up having to make some changes for your own setup and everything like that. As far as cost, altogether, if I had to guess, I'd probably say between the $400 or $500 range. You know, and based on some of the kits, because I looked into doing like buying a dual battery system, like a kit that's already ready to go and everything like that. Those starting, I believe, were $400 to $500. Sometimes some of them were even more than that, and that was without the battery, and you still had to go buy your own battery. So it just really depends on the route you want to go. The other thing is your vehicle. The F-150 is obviously an older vehicle, so they don't really make a lot of parts for this, and they definitely, as far as I've been able to find, they don't make a dual battery kit for this vehicle yet. Hence the reason why I took out my rear bench seats, and now that is all storage and has my dual battery system in there, and then has the fridge on the other side. You know, this is the I think it's called the super cab or extended cab. I forget which one they clarify it as, but the other thing too that you look at as well is now this is an off-road vehicle that I use. It's the toy, so I am very much so a function person and reliability person, as opposed to looks and making it look cool and everything like that. So a lot of the times I really don't have passengers in my vehicle, so I took out my rear bench seat, and that's what it looks like now. The other thing that you think about too is that there's not a whole lot of people that can fit in the rear bench seat of one of these F-150s. You pretty much have that much leg room, and that's pretty much about it. So it's not very comfortable to sit in. And I wasn't carrying passengers very often, so there really wasn't any point of me having my bench seat in the back of my truck. So if you're looking to build a dual battery system for a Ford or F-150, or you maybe have a similar setup to this for a pickup, you know, why not? The other thing I mentioned too is how long can I run my fridge off of the battery system. I can run my fridge for about 16 hours straight without having to charge the dual battery system. The Dometic fridge that I purchased is the 50, so I want to say to get up to temperature, it's like 1.9 amps, and then maintaining that temperature, everything after that is 0.9 amps per hour. And then it just also depends on whether or not I'm running my inverter as well. Typically what I'll do is, that was one of the other switches I did, was a inverter shut off, so I'll run the inverter to charge up all of my electronics when we're driving, and then I'll kill the inverter when we're sitting at camp, and that way it doesn't further drain the battery. Because that's the other thing too, is inverters will draw obviously a decent amount of power away from your auxiliary battery. So other things to think about, stuff like that. You know, as far as the other draws, occasionally the only real draws I have are the inverter and the fridge. Realistically, it just depends on how you maintain your batteries and everything like that. But that is the system so far. The next upgrade I'm thinking about doing is a solar system setup, but I really wanted to make sure that everything up to this point was solid and good to go. Because once you add a solar setup in there, now you have something else that you're potentially going to have to mess around with and try and figure out and everything like that. So yeah, I think solar system will probably be the next bet. So we'll see how that install goes. The other thing you start running out of quick too is room. So even you guys are looking for a place for your dual battery system, make sure it's convenient to get to as well, because chances are you're going to need to get to all your electronics very easily. And you're probably going to need some extra room in case you needed to add stuff. For example, I added an inverter, which I wasn't planning on doing, and then I also added in the low voltage disconnect, which I wasn't planning on adding either. So think about stuff like that. Think about the fact that you might eventually end up having to add some other stuff as well.